We're going to start today's daf, which is the bottom of Beis on the Beis. Today's daf is Gimel. That's a daf for Shabbos Kodesh. And the daf Yomi tells us 8 lines from the bottom on 2b. Amar b'Chanina Misura. So Chanina Misura taught Ulema Inish Le'isasei Bezman Hazeh. Nowadays, a person should not say to their wife, "Lo tistri b'hadei pormi." Don't be secluded with that man, because Dilma Kaimlan Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe we paskin like the position of Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda that for the warning, you don't even need to do the warning in front of 2 witnesses. Just you doing it yourself is enough for it to take effect. And so therefore, that for when you do the warning, just the husband by himself is enough to make it binding. And then misdatra, and then maybe afterwards she'll become secluded with the man. And today we can no longer do the bitter waters, and we're not allowed to do it after the destruction of the temple. And then she'll be prohibited forever. But I want to point out, it wouldn't be forever. It would only be until the base of Mikdash is built. Normally, the Gemara always says, the base of Mikdash will be built. Here we're saying the base of Mikdash. Why does the Gemara take such a pessimistic approach? But anyway, the Gemara says a man should not warn their wife today because then maybe it's going to be an irreversible situation. Amar Reish Lakish, and now the first language of the daf, the first language of the Masechta is Hamekane. What does the word kinoi mean? It says Reish Lakish, Ma'alashon kinoi. What does this word kinoi even mean? So Reish Lakish explains, Davar mato kina beino ben acherim. It's something that causes there to be anger or wrath between her and other people. Why? Because Alma Kasavar must be kinoi al piasmo, because he warns her. He's the only one who warns her. Nobody else knows about it. Kuli alma yadi dekanila. Nobody else knows that he warned her. Now Amri, and they'll say, my dekama dekabadla, and they'll say, and the people will think the worst. They'll say, what's the matter? What happened that she's separated from us? And then as a consequence of this, she'll say she's separated. What's the concept? She'll say she's separated. And therefore, and that will cause there to be tremendous wrath between her and other people. Rav Yemer bar Rav Shalmi Mishmei Abaye Amar. Rav Yemer bar Rav Shalmaya said the name of Abaye, it's Davar Amatil Kina Beino Beina. It's something that causes there to be tremendous wrath between the husband and wife. Why? Alma Kasavar Kinoi al Pishnayim. He says that the kinoi has to be done in front of 2 witnesses. Al Pishnayim Eidim. Everybody will know that everybody will know why he's caused her to be separate from everybody else. And so therefore it's only between the husband and the wife, because she's going to be very upset that he's suspecting her of adultery. On the top of Gimel Amid Aleph, Alma Kasavri. So we see from here, since we say that the word kina means your causing there to be wrath, it must be the asher kanos. Must be that it's prohibited to warn, because that's why they say kino means you cause anger. But according to the one who says that you're allowed to do wrath, we saw on Daf Beis Amid Aleph that at the very beginning it said that there is a position of one Tana, that's Tana of our Mishnah, that you're not allowed to be Mekana, that you're not allowed to warn, because it was said in the language of our Mishnah as a b'diavad. Who is the one who says you're allowed to be Mekana? Ma'adamar mutar kanos. According to them, what does the expression of kinoi mean? According to them, the kinoi is just an expression of warning, that you're warning her. As it states, as it states in the verse, it says in the book of Yoel, meaning to say God warned his people, that God warned his people about the locusts that he said, God warns the locusts that they should not anymore destroy the people and destroy the land because he had mercy on his people. That's from Joel chapter 2, verse 18. Tanya, Hayi Rabbi Meir Omer, Meir taught, Adam over Avera B'Seiser. Let's say a man will do a sin in secret. By the way, so what's the flow here? A lot of times we see at the beginning of a Masechta, the opening pages are like introductory lectures to the tractate. So you could imagine that this is where it was coming from. Now, Rabbi Meir says a person will sometimes do a sin in secret. And Hashem will punish him or make a declaration about him in public. As it says, V'avar alav ruach kina, v'kineas ishto, that a spirit of kina passed over him, and he warned his wife. And so therefore, if this woman was sinning in secret, God will place into the heart of her husband to warn her. And then as a result of this, everybody will know about her sin. The word avera, is an expression of saying something publicly and declaring it, as it says, Vayitzav Moshe, Vayaviru kol b'machaneh. It says Moses made the command, and the sound went out throughout the camp. So the avro of ruach kinah is related to where in the Torah it talks about that the sound traveled throughout the camp. So that HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts this spirit of jealousy into the husband so that the sound will become public, the fact that she sinned. Reish Lakish says, Reish Lakish Amar. So usually Reish Lakish Amar is this type of language is like a dispute with the earlier opinion. So we have to see what it is. But Reish Lakish says, Ein adam over avera om kein nefnas bo ruach shtus. Reish Lakish says, no. Why does a person sin? Only if he has an external spirit that has overcome him. As it says, ish kitiste ishto, means to say a man, literally a man or a woman, kitiste ishto, if his wife will go astray, but we should read it as tishtekse, with a shin, meaning to say from shtus, that from this nonsense the woman came to sin. Tana debei Rabbi Shmuel Neima Amina Torah Eid Echad Sotah. Why does the Torah believe one witness by a Sotah? We saw on Daf Beis Amid Aleph and Amid Beis that one witness is believed to say that she actually committed the adultery. Why does the Torah believe one witness by a Sotah? Sheraglayim Udavar, because there are legs to the matter, circumstantial evidence. Sharikina la ministera, because first he warned her and then she was secluded. And then the witness comes along and testifies that she was tamei. But the warning, the concept that he has to warn her, that was written in the Torah after the seclusion and after the testimony of the Tumah, because it says, she was secluded, she committed adultery, and there was no witness. And only afterwards, it's saying in the next pasuk, only in the next pasuk does it say he warned her. So, how do you explain that? No, so it says va'avar in the pasuk means vikvar avar. He had already warned her. He had already had this feeling. But so the Gemara says, El me'ata. So if that's the case, so that the expression of avar means it had already passed. In the past, the poo perfect, it had happened. What about the fact that it says in Bamidbar chapter 32, Vavar lachem kol chalutz? You mean to say when Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Ruvain and Gad and half of Menashe that they first have to send the vanguard in to lead them through the land, and only then can they settle on the other side of the Jordan. Hachinami, would you also say here that they had already passed over the Jordan? But that's impossible. He's talking about the future. So the Gemara says, well, no. There were in states, the context there is that you're going to conquer the land and then you'll go back to your place. That's clearly the case that it's referring to the future. But in the passage of Sotah, if you want to say it's like you wrote, Va'avar is referring that if you want to say that the avar is after the seclusion and the tumah, but if you want to say vavar basa tumah and stira, then kinoi lamali, then why do you need the warning there? So it doesn't make sense. So therefore, from the context, we have to say vavar refers back to before it happened, to the past. So the Gemara says, Tanan de Beir Shmuel, Ein Adam Mekana le'ishto. A person will only warn his wife if there is if the spirit has entered into him from above. As it states, that the spirit passed through him and he warned his wife. My ruach, Rabbanan Amri ruach tumah. What does the ruach here mean? It means the spirit of tumah, that the Satan brought him this tumah to cause him to sin, that he should cause his wife pain. That's what caused him to warn. Rashi Amar ruach tahara. No, it's not the spirit of sin, it's the spirit of purity, that he hates this licentiousness. That's what caused him to warn her. Mistabra Kamanda Amar Ruach Tahara. And the Gemara says that we're going to paskin. It's logical to say like that we follow the position that says the spirit of Tahara has passed in him. The Tanya V'kinei Ishto. He warns his wife. This is Rishus. He's not obligated to warn her. He's allowed to warn her. Meaning to say if he wants to, he's allowed to. That's the position of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says, Chova, he's obligated. Now, Amris Bishlama Ruach Tahara Shapir. If you want to say it's the spirit of Tahara, then it makes sense why Rabbi Shmuel says you're allowed to, and Rabbi Akiva says you're obligated to. Eli Amris Ruach Tumah, if you want to say it's the spirit of Tumah, Rishus V'chova La'ulu Inish Ruach Tumah B'nafshi. Are you allowed or even obligated to bring the Ruach Tumah into your soul? So the Gemara says, okay, so we paskin, and it must be Ruach Tahara. A pure spirit has moved him. Gufa v'kinei as ishto rishus. So let's analyze this. Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says it's a rishus to warn your wife, and Rabbi Akiva says it's rishus mean you're allowed to, and Rabbi Akiva says you're obligated. Chova. So it says la yitama. What about the fact that it says that a Kohen is allowed to become tamei for his wife? It says for her he can become tamei. That's rishus. That's the position of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says no. This is obligatory. That to become tamei for one's wife or his other relatives is obligatory. That the Kohen is not just allowed to become tamei for the 7 relatives; he's obligated to. What about the fact that it says by the Canaanite slaves that you inherit your slave, the Canaanites, and they have to serve you forever? Rishus. That means it's optional, that we're allowed to keep them as slaves. That's the position of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says it's chova. You're not allowed to free a Canaanite slave. It's obligatory. Amarle Rav Papa Abaye. Amarle Rav Mashar Shel Rava. Lema Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Akiva B'Kol Torah Kua Hachi Puigi. That maybe Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel are arguing about the whole Torah. Tamar Amar Rishos Umar V'Chova. That one says it's a discretionary, one says it's obligatory. Well, if that's the case, according to Rabbi Shmuel, there would be no obligatory mitzvahs. Everything would be optional. Amrway, no, this can't be the case, but rather here in these 3 laws, by the Sotah, by the Kohen, and by the slaves, they're arguing about the verses itself. So the Gemara is going to explain how they did that. So what does Rabbi Shmuel mean when he says that it's optional to warn your wife? Rabbi Akiva Omer Chova. My time with Rabbi Shmuel. What's the reason for Rabbi Shmuel? Several Kiaitam. He holds like the following Tana. The Tanya of Elazar ben Yaakov Omer. Since the Torah says you're not allowed to hate your brother in your heart, Yachol could go into. I might think even in this case, where the wife is a sotah, you're being warned not to hate her. Talmud Omar, and so it means that a person is allowed to warn his wife, and he doesn't have to feel like he's in violation of the prohibition. But if it were not for the fact that the Torah allowed you to do this, it would be prohibited to warn her. So therefore, Rabbi Shmuel says in this place, it's mashma'us is the rishus and not obligatory. Because the Torah needs to tell us that it's allowed, because otherwise we would have thought you're not allowed to do something that's hateful. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. He says obligatory because kinoi achrin eksiv, because it says the word kinoi twice. It says the word kinoi twice. Because it says v'avar av ruach kinoi v'kineis ishto, and then it actually says v'kineis ishto twice. So therefore, that proves that it's obligatory. Rabbi Shmuel, Aiti debayla mechtav v'hinit ma'ah v'hilo nitma'ah. So Rabbi Shmuel, how could he say? How would he explain the fact that it says kinoi twice? Well, he says since the Torah wanted to write v'hinit ma'ah, and also she became tamei, she did the sin v'hilo nitma'ah. That meaning to say that if there is a doubt whether or not she committed the adultery, she's going to be prohibited to be with her husband out of a doubt. Therefore, the Torah says, twice. Since the Torah wants to say we're not sure if she sinned or she didn't sin, therefore the Torah says kina twice. So the Gemara says, but why do you have to say kina twice? Look at the Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel. The reason is, like Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel taught, Kol Parsha Shenem Rav Nishnis or Nishnis El B'Dvil Davar Shenis Chadash Ba. So like Rabbi Shmuel taught that any passage which was said and repeated, it was only repeated because of the new thing that was in it. And so therefore, even though you don't need all the words a second time, still there was one part of it that was needed, that's enough for it to be included. What about the fact by the Kohen, Lo Yitama, Rishus, that's different Rabbi Shmuel. That's the Rabbi Shmuel says it's Rishus, or Mekiva says Chova. That's obligatory for the Kohen to become Tameh for one of his 7 relatives. My time at the Rabbi Shmuel. Why does Rabbi Shmuel say it's Rishus? Since the Torah tells us a regular Kohen is not allowed to become Tameh for a regular person, it's Shochem Nechtav Lo Yitameh. It needs to tell us that in this case, you can become Tameh. The only reason why it says Lo Yitameh is to counteract the place where it's not allowed to become Tameh. Whereas Rabbi Kiva, Mechiyim L'Sheiro Nafka. He says we could have learned that out, that you're allowed to become tummy for the relatives because it says love. So that teaches us you can become tummy for your relatives. So la yitama is to teach us it's obligatory. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Shmuel is telling us that these words, la yitama is telling us you can become tummy for your wife or your sister is unmarried, but not for her relatives, but not for her limbs, only for her, but not for the limbs. That if her limb had fallen off, we'd seen this in Nazir, it's incomplete, then you're not allowed to become tamei for that. Rabbi Kiva im Queen lichtov Rahmana la v'lishtok. The Torah could have just written la, meaning to say that's all we need to be to write. Nefesh lo yitama be'amav kim l'sheiro la. Meaning to say that he's allowed to become tamei for her, and that would have been enough. But yitama, why does it say la yitama? Shema mina. Rabbi Shmuel, what does he do? I did the cost of law, cost of nami yitama. He says once the Torah writes law, then it writes also yitama, like we said. Look, that in very Shmuel, Tana very Shmuel. Kol parsha shenemar v'nishnis v'nishnis el b'dil shvil davar shenis chadash. Exactly the same explanation that we saw before. That sometimes the Torah repeats something because there's a new law taught in it, so it repeats it. What about the concept that the Canaanite slave has to serve you forever? That they always have to be your slave. Rabbi Shmuel says it's a rishus. Divi Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Kiva Omer Chover. Rabbi Kiva says it's obligatory. My time in the Rabbi Shmuel. What's the reason why Rabbi Shmuel says it's rishus? Because it's written because it's written in the verse that it says that you're not allowed to let anybody of the 7 nations live. You have to kill them. Therefore, you have to say, but you could also allow them to live. So, it's to allow the following case. In what case is it allowing? That if there's somebody from the other nations who had relations with the Canaanites, and they had an offspring from a Canaanite woman and another idolatrous man, you're allowed to acquire the slave and you're not required to kill it. How do we know that if there's one of the nations, who has relations with a Canaanite woman, so how do we know that you're allowed to acquire this You're allowed to acquire him as a slave. Says the verse, Tamalomer, Vigam mi b'nei. Tamalomer, Vigam mi b'nei atoshavim agarim imachem. Mehem tiknu. So the verse states, also for amongst those who are living there, who are living amongst you, you're allowed to acquire. And so we see from here that you're allowed to acquire a slave that was born to a father from the other nations, even though his mother's a Canaanite. You don't have to kill such a slave. I might think it's the same law with respect to a Canaanite man who has relations with a idolatrous woman from one of the other tribes, that you can maybe acquire him as a slave. That are born in your land. That the verse states, amongst those who are born amongst your land, and they shall be for you as an inheritance. But what does that mean? From amongst those who are born in your lands, meaning that their father is not a Canaanite. And they came to the land of Israel to marry a woman, and they had children in the land. From them you're allowed to purchase, because by the idolaters it goes after the father, but not those who live in your land. So that they were born outside the land of Israel to a Canaanite father, and they married a woman from the other nations, and now their children are coming to live amongst you. So, mean to say, if it was a Canaanite man who was with one of the nations, that is going to be prohibited. Rabbi Akiva, why does Rabbi Akiva say it's obligatory? So the Gemara says, this law that they follow the lineage of the father, Rabbi Akiva learns out from me mehem tiknu nafka. Well, so if that's the case, in me, Hem Tiknu is to teach us that the lineage by the idolater follows the father. So if that's the case, what do we do with Olam Tavadu? To teach us it's obligatory. The Rabbi Yishmael Bahem, he says, Olam Bahem, those you're allowed to subjugate, but not your brothers. Who can you keep as a slave forever? The Canaanite, but not your brothers. Rabbi Akiva learns out the word from your brothers from the conclusion of the verse. It says in the end of that verse, amongst your brothers, the children of Israel, each man and his brother should not work in befarach, hard labor. Rabbi Shmuel, we have those who listen to Rabbi Tzal share on Nazir on Tuesday night. He saw the Sefer Chinuch, what he said about the word befarach, what he says about the Canaanite slaves. You can look it up or look it on the recording. Rabbi Shmuel, what does Rabbi Shmuel do? Since it says your brothers, you should not work befarach, sivnami bahem. It also says by the Canaanites that you shall work them befarach. Like the same answer we saw before. Even if you have one thing new, it's enough to repeat it. So now the Gemara, since like we said, this is an introduction to the Masechta, the Gemara says, Amar Avchista znusa bebeisa. Let's say you have licentiousness in your house. Kikario le sumsima. It's like the activity for a sesame worm, or for a sesame worm. They're just like a worm, a silkworm, basically eats and diminish, and they get smaller. So too, the znus, this licentiousness, is destructive, and also as a result of it is destroying the whole house. Amar Rav Chisda, tukfa bebeisa. Let's say you have anger in the house that destroys the house. Kikarya with sumsima. This is like the karya the sumsima. It's the same thing. So one idea says that what's the worst thing in the house is the snus, is this the licentiousness. But the other idea is that what's the worst thing in the house? The worst thing in the house is the anger in the house. The anger in the house is the like this, just like this worm is to the sesame, is the anger to this worm is to the sesame. So the Gemara says, well, edi both snus and anger, when are they destructive? Only when they are be'itita, only when they're in the woman. Because when the man is mezana, or he's angry, then when she's going to be, because when the woman is mizana or if she is angry, then she's going to be involved in this activity and she's not going to keep up the house. And so therefore the house is going to be destroyed. Although begavra leislemba. It's not as bad if the man does it. I don't know what that means, but we're probably going to see, there's a lot of statements in this Gemara which push us and challenge us. And we see it from the very beginning. We see it both things to hurt the man and hurt the woman, meaning to say that the Talmud doesn't take any prisoners. It says it straight out. So it's saying it's worse when the adultery or the anger comes from the woman than from the man. But we also saw that Talmud said that the man, if the woman is adulterous, it's all the man's fault. So anyway, it's all there. You just have to internalize it. Amar Rav Chisda b'tchila kodem shechatu Yisrael ha'isa shchina shorem kol echad ve'echad. At first, before the Jewish people sinned with the sin of licentiousness, the Shechina was resting on every single person. Shorem kol echad ve'echad. As it states, Ki Hashem elokecha mesalech b'kerev machanecha. Hashem is walking amongst their camp. Kivin shechatu, once the Jewish people sinned, at that point, the Shechina departed from them. As it says, V'lo yera b'cha ervas davar v'shav mecharecha. That the sin of Arayas caused the Shechina to depart. Amar b'shmol bar Nachman Amar Yochanan kol most mitzvah achas ba'olam hazeh. Whoever does one mitzvah in this world, mikadmato, olechas lefanav la'olam haba. This mitzvah goes out and makes a proclamation before him into the world to come. As it states, your righteousness goes before you. Whoever does one sin in this world, it wraps him around him to the day of judgment. As it says, you'll have two archos tarkam, yalu betov yovedu. The paths of your ways will hold you. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, or somebody who does a sin, kishur bo kakelef. The sin is tied to him like a dog. As it states, that when Joseph, when he was attempted to sin with the wife of Potiphar, it says, that Joseph didn't listen to her to be with her to sin. He didn't sin with her in this world. And if he would have listened to her, he would have been also wrapped around her into the world to come. So the Gemara says, going back to what we said now, the Gemara is teaching that we said earlier that a person is believed to say, one witness is believed to say a woman committed adultery. Tanan Asam, that if we learned over there in the Mishnah and Aleph, that if one witness says, I saw her, that she committed the adultery, he's believed. And then she wouldn't drink the bitter waters. Shahaya Badin really would have thought not to believe her, not to believe one witness. If the Torah hadn't told us that to believe him. Why? Just like the first initial testimony that she was secluded, which is not forever. We need two people for that, according to Rabbi Yoshua. The final testimony, which says she actually did sin, which says she's prohibited forever. For sure, we should have at least two. There's no witness, meaning to say any testimony at all is able to make her to say she committed adultery, even one. And the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, it should be for sure the case for the first testimony. Just like the final testimony that's committed adultery, which she's prohibited forever. That's okay with one witness. The initial testimony, should this guy made for sure, it should be with one witness. And the verse, it says here, and by Dine Mamadas it states, so we say a gzeira shav to the word davar that requires two witnesses. Gemara says, but this davar, that one witness is not believed by stira, we learn from the comparison. Do you want to say that we learn it from that? Mi ve'ein ba the eight ain't banach, we should learn it from there. So the Gemara says, Bavel, Bekinoi, Bavel, Bastir, Mibali. No, we need to teach us that. So don't we need it to teach us Bavel, Bekinoi, Bavel, Bastira? That isn't it to teach us this idea that we said earlier, Ba, but not by warning, and Ba, but not by steer. So the Gemara says, Hachinami Kamar. That's what the Tana is saying. That this is what the Mishnah is saying. That Talmud Omar Ba, Bavel, Bekinoi, Bavel, Bastira. Okay, we'll stop here the recording. I just want to say that a couple of things.